I'm Jack O'Keefe, as you can see in the corner of my screen. And this time we have a non-presenter meeting. And what we want to do is explore a theme that possibly could have one or two follow-up sessions. It's a huge topic. Certain topics are huge within the spiritual domain. And if it comes at the end of today that we have, this can deepen, we need to find out what research has been done or to look at specific cases for follow-on sessions, then we're very open to trying that way of working. Second thing that's different about today is that we'd like if people who don't usually take the microphone to put their hand up to engage in the conversation. This is simply to increase our community participation in every way we can. We'd ask to, when we speak, just to be as succinct and short as we can so that we can hear from each other and grow as a community. Okay, they're the logistics. So we're going to use the hand up function to speak. There's too many of us in order to let it be a free pop-up situation. And so everybody, the topic of money and spirituality. The focus that we hoped to go in today, and let's see how it rolls, is underpinned by, I suppose, a recognition that money, sex, and power are areas that haven't been dealt with well within the many spiritual traditions over the eons. Some traditions have set up vows around poverty, around chastity, around obedience, which would be power. Some have created virtues of abstaining from power, from dealing with money. We have quotes in Nisargadatta and in Neem Karoli Baba, in various books around like, stay away from money, don't worry about money, don't worry about money. However, contemporary spirituality is not such that donations happen automatically, that community support hosts a spiritual leader. It's correct, I think, and correct isn't the best word. It's an evolutionary positive move where we need to be within regular householder lives, living regular lives and dealing with all aspects of our contemporary lifestyles. And money is an inevitable factor in that, inevitable. And so while there still is a strong donation culture, there is also a type of wanting to have prices that are allowing everybody to have equal participation, but yet the teacher's needs are in the middle. And what I'm personally interested in is like, how do I find where my needs are met in integrity, and how does that reflect in my pricing? And can I take responsibility for my needs so that there is zero hidden agendas around finances? That's one approach that I take. We have another issue, I think, around no benchmarking within spiritual leadership. Some of us price according to public and motivational speakers, and some price according to psychotherapeutic services, counselors. And if we don't come from any of those traditional models where there is a benchmark of a normal price, how do we find our pricing that is in integrity? And how do we find that integrity when there are so many cultural inputs historically and expectations of what spiritual leaders should charge, can charge? I've just thrown out a lot of different ideas there just to say, let's see where we pick it up and let's see where the conversation goes. We're very open. obviously, to seeing what's alive here.
So you want someone to start?
Sure.
Okay. Well, I'll say a couple of things just because I can unmute myself. And others, if they want to raise your hand, you go to those three little dots in the lower right-hand corner, I believe. Isn't that right? And then you can click the raise hand feature.
It's in the reactions. If you've got a laptop, it's in the reactions.
Yeah. So I don't know, just a couple of thoughts off the top of my head, a little bit disconnected from one another. I was just talking to Jack before we let everybody in about a situation in which a spiritual teacher has relieved people of their life savings, in some cases almost $1 million on several occasions, and couches it in spiritual terms, like, oh, this money has bad karma attached to it and I'll clean it up for you, and things like that. So that's something we can discuss, whether we should be using spiritual mumbo jumbo to rationalize accepting large amounts of money from people. Another is that, there's one guy I interviewed whose attitude was that no spiritual teacher should be charging money. And you hear this from people because spirituality is a pure thing. It's a non-material thing. And, and I said to him, well, what should they do? Should they work an 8-hour day and then do some kind of spiritual teaching thing in the evenings or something? He didn't have a good answer for that. But some people do have that attitude. Like it's wrong to get paid for being a spiritual teacher. And, you can argue back, well, therapists get paid and psychologists get paid and other helping professions get paid. This is a helping profession. Even priests have a salary or some means of support. So there's that. On the other hand, we are, when we choose guests for Batgap, we're not too inclined to charge people, to accept people that are charging huge amounts of money. There was a guy recently that was charging over $1,000 for like a 1 hour or an hour and a half, personal one-on-one session. And that just seems crazy. And we just don't feel like publicizing such people. On the other hand, we're a little bit hypocritical because I would love to interview Eckhart Tolle and he's made millions. And I've interviewed Deepak Chopra and he's made millions. So, but I don't know if those guys are blatantly commercial. I mean, Deepak has written 80 something books and he makes most of his money from royalties. And Eckhart, I know his seminars are kind of expensive and everything, but he's the major player. But it is a little bit of a dual standard, maybe, if I'm declining some people, but I'd be happy to interview him. So I haven't totally thought that one out. Anyway, those are my comments. Maybe that'll provide some fuel for feedback and additional comments. I don't see any hands up yet, but if you want to.
Cleena has her hand up there.
Okay, go ahead and.
Hi, Cleena.
Hi, Jack. I like what you said, Rick, about accessibility for people with low income and how sometimes money becomes the ticket for not getting our need met. And we all have different earning capacities and different statuses. And a brain surgeon is paid a lot more than a street cleaner, but they might have the same urge for awakening and inspiration. So I really like that. My question, Jack, was, this is something that really bothers me, is if we have a non-dual understanding and if we have, not awakening, but understanding, and if we want to be non-dualistic with our money and we have more than what we need and can share, and the whole income inequality and some people just don't even get a decent square meal, that really bothers me. Then how, without me taking responsibility and being the doer and doing it out of guilt, how should one be with money? I know that there's no right way, but what would be the way to do something? Yeah.
I'm by no means have all the answers here at all. But from my own perspective, what I feel we have to do is unpack our conditioning. around it. We, just like we have to unpack our conditioning, because that is what interferes with that inner voice, that inner movement, is our conditioning is going to obscure the message, and in comes the personal agenda. And money, like all of the rest of them, is like, what were we taught? What was modeled? What, you know, what messages were we given? And to unpack and see through all of those, and then make friends with the energy, the currency that is money, and see what it wants and how can we serve that energy. For me, that's how it works. I might say something else in a year's time, but that's where I'm at right now.
And so, although it could be a slow process, if enough of us overcome our conditioning, we could change our money system so it works more for the needs of.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Once we get the personal agenda out of the way, the me turns to a we.
Thank you.
Worth mentioning that a number of spiritual teachers do offer
We can't hear you, Rick.
I didn't unmute myself. A number of spiritual teachers do offer spirit discounts and total scholarships. Adya Shanti does, Francis Lucille, probably many of them. And so that's nice. We have 3 hands raised. Shall I take another one, Jack?
Lisa?
Yeah, Lisa. Let's, how do you get them in?
Hi there. I think I'm unmuted.
Good.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm so delighted to be here. And I'm Lisa Ritter. I'm from the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area. And I love this conversation. I think it's so important. And I'll just briefly give one of my solutions that I feel comfortable with in the way that I work with my clients. I'm a psycho-spiritual counselor and a meditation teacher. And what I've done to make it work for me is have a suite of offerings where I can serve those people who have no financial resources. So I twice a week offer free live meditations on Insight Timer, for instance. Then I have a lower set of offerings that are, under $100 that you can still get some sort of support on your spiritual journey. And then I have my one-on-one pricing, which is just normal counseling price. I don't do that. I'm $180. And I even do that on a sliding scale. If someone decides to purchase 10 sessions, I'll go all the way down to 120. Like, I just do a very generous sliding offer. And then when I do programs, I do what a lot of teachers are now doing. And I see a lot of, I think CIIS is doing this now as well with their programs, just offering, what do I need in order to make a living? If you can provide more, here's another price where you can support someone else who maybe can't afford so much. And then here's the price for someone who just can't even afford what would be the general price. And for me, this feels really in integrity, because I know that in my own life, I've needed help and not been able to get it because of the ridiculous pricing and I've struggled because of that, not getting the help that I needed. And so I have really a place in my heart of knowing that people are there too. And I trust that people will do what they can and give what they can. So that's just really briefly a little bit of what I've done for myself with my work.
And do your needs get met, Lisa?
They do. They do get met because I have this wide range of offerings, and I really do trust that that because of that, I'm able to serve the people that most need the work, and those people who can afford the one-on-one, I have to do marketing and I have to pay for that stuff, but I do get my needs met. Yes.
Beautiful. And I think when we don't get our needs met and we're not able to acknowledge that, there's when the undercurrent of hidden agendas and manipulation can fly in. Susan?
Yes, my name is Susan and I live in Connecticut and my work is as a psychotherapist. And what I've been doing is working with a community foundation that works with a sliding scale. And that's been very, very satisfying. And my needs are met. I'm retired and my needs are met. So it's not a difficult fit in any way. But I appreciated very much, Jack, when you talked about how in other times the idea of power, money, and sex was all, we didn't have to deal with it as much individually. And I think it's really interesting from a astrological point of view, the planet Pluto has everything to do with power, money, and sex, and with very deep inner transformation. And I think we, as a society, we're collectively going through that in a huge, huge way. If you look at what's happening in the world, and on an individual as well, I think it's one of the biggest areas that we are asked to really deal with, given the world situation. So it feels really good to be here and that this is the topic that we're dealing with.
Thank you, Susan.
Mm-hmm.
Phil?
Hi, everybody. I just thought I'd offer some broader historical perspective for everybody who feels ambivalent about the conflict between not wanting to deal with money issues and the need to pay the bills. Every guru who ever came here, all the swamis, all the Buddhist monks, all the gurus, all the yogacharyas, including the ones who took vows of renunciation, wrestled with the same issues. They all had to pay the bills. They all got advice from Americans on how to do that, whether to charge, whether to ask for donations, how much to charge, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. And in some cases, as they grew to have a large following, they had to deal with buying buildings and paying mortgages and paying salaries and all the rest of the kind of things that any entrepreneur would have to deal with. Some of you know, I wrote a biography of Yogananda. And it became obvious in reading his letters and all the private stuff, he never stopped worrying about money. He was teaching during the Depression and they had no money, they couldn't pay the bills. He was constantly, some would say harassing, some would say begging his wealthy disciples to help out and to give his organization a secure footing. You see it, right up to the last years of his life, wanting to secure the financial foundation for his legacy. So it's not, and they all were criticized. They were all criticized for being money hungry. They were criticized for leaning on their client or their disciples to fork over money. They were criticized for charging for courses. They offered a lot for free, but they charged for other things. They all made those decisions. When TM was at its height, Maharishi was, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who Rick and I studied a lot with. They made a conscious decision to be an educational organization rather than a religious nonprofit. So they could, in fact, charge for what you would call a workshop or a seminar courses. So this is not new, and it's very difficult to struggle with. Maybe different for those of us who are independent and we don't have organizations and employees and salaries and buildings, but we do have expenses. And we have to be real about it. At the same time, we're idealistic and try to have integrity.
Hey, Phil.
I don't know that there's easy answers. I just wanted to offer, that we're in good company.
Phil, you've been to India a lot, and traditionally, how is this handled in India? We're talking about gurus who come to the West and face the reality of Western money issues, but obviously there's some pretty fancy temples and things in India, and
Yeah.
very large ones. I mean, I guess it maybe over there.
Donations,
Yeah, donations, right?
wealthy people. Some gurus, some teachers charge for their courses if they're teaching hatha yoga or whatever. But most of the swamis and gurus I know are connected to some kind of lineage, and they have, it's a money raising kind of proposition. So I'm going to turn over the mic to somebody else because the gardeners are here.
When I was in India, I remember sitting in and, on various satsang gatherings. And the Westerner who kind of told me that, look, this whole network, come on, I'll bring you to a meeting. There's a whole subculture of satsangs here other than sitting in silence. So I was like, so where do we pay? How do we pay? Oh, it's all free. And as I watched and people came in, when Indian people came in, they would bring something from their breakfast, or they would bring a check, or they would bring a packet of cookies. So I went back to that Westerner and I said, it's not for free, it's donating. And then the longer I was there, I understood everybody gave what they could. Everybody gave something. What was understood by my brain and our brains that, oh, it's for free, spirituality is for free. It wasn't at all. Nobody came empty-handed. So it's like there was nuances in the culture there that we missed, and I think often that gives rise to our opinion of, well, it's spirituality, it should be free. As Phil started off his talk by saying there, it should be free. It's not free. It's not free, but there's a tradition of tithing in some cultures and bringing what you can, and that's respected and honored. And so every culture has their own nuances, and very often we don't pick up the nuances because we're seeing what our own filter systems allow us to see. Ariana? Sorry, you're muted. Yeah.
Hi, this is Ariane. I'm from the Bay Area in California. So actually, this kind of relates to your last point, Jack, about donations. I'm more used to a more traditional Theravada Buddhist monastic background, and it's, the monks and nuns live on alms, and so there is, amongst really traditional Theravadins, this stigma, like you're not supposed to formally charge. It's supposed to be entirely donation based. That said, I noticed when I sort of talked to people, a lot of these monastics will quietly admit that they don't really get enough to fully support everything they do, in particular healthcare. A lot of monastics are on Medicaid. I know some wealthier, better supported monasteries will pay for healthcare for their monastics, but that means they have the right to turn you down if they think your healthcare costs will be too high and they can't support that. So for me, that provoked a little bit of ambivalence in me, because I think if I chose to live a life of poverty, voluntary poverty, knowing that the taxpayers are subsidizing me, I would feel very ambivalent about that. And I'm not saying that to judge the monastics who do that, but I think that's an angle that I was surprised very few people talked about the moral dimension to that. And they instead just sort of blamed these lay teachers for charging too much. So that would be my point.
Thank you, Ariane. Good point. Connie?
Hi, everybody. I'd kind of like to add a more psychological dimension to this, if that's okay. Because we're kind of talking about the behavioral, and there's a whole inner world that goes along with spirituality and money. you know, in my book, Romancing the Shadow, it's kind of built around power, sex, and money shadows. And to extend that into the spiritual domain, what I mean by that is the unconscious attitudes and beliefs and images and associations with money, so that it becomes really charged with symbolic meanings. It's not just what we need to survive. It's full of symbolic, non-literal, non-concrete meanings. And so when we have an experience, as I did with several teachers, of financial abuse, you know, that was kind of shrouded in emotional abuse and, you know, deep spiritual disillusionment, the money in a way becomes a symptom of all of the hypocrisy and lies that's kind of buried inside, unconsciously inside the relationship. My sense is that most of it is not malicious. Sometimes it is, you know, sometimes somebody's on, you know, Rajneesh and his Rolls Royces, but most of the time it's unconscious. And some of it is cultural differences, like Phil was saying, that, you know, people are transplants from other lineages that never deal with this. But I'm kind of more interested in how we can, I mean, this is given the name of this organization, how do we promote financial integrity in the spiritual realm, which for me means dealing with financial or money shadows. And by the way, there's a great book called The Secret Life of Money, which is just being republished this year, that's all about the symbolic meanings of money. So I don't know, that's kind of where my interest lies, rather than in what we charge or all that stuff.
I just want to say, when people make comments, be sure to note down, if there's something you'd like to respond to in what they say, be sure to note that down, because we're kind of taking the questioners in the order they raise their hand, but we don't want to lose, you know, responses to these comments. Also, people who are posting things in the chat, let me know if you don't have a microphone or would prefer not to speak on camera or something, and I could perhaps read some of the comments later. But if you do have a mic, it would be better for you to just speak it out when you have the chance.
Catherine?
Hey everybody, how you doing? It's good to see you. So I've been thinking about this in the context of who am I and who are we in that intersection. I usually always have 3 points of view in terms of integral: first person, second person, third person, and how does it all, what does it mean in terms of wholeness? And so the crux of it, from my point of view, is the symbolism and the of creative manifestation. So there's this way that creation and the rhythms of creation come through embodiment. And and there's a first person point of view. I'm driven, I am, you know, driven to create this, you know, whatever it is. And there's that me, not me element to all acts of creation. And then as we intersect with our society and our culture, there's different flavors to that on what the currency or the energy is reflected within your family, within your society, around class and structures. And they can be very dense and interesting to intersect with. Like for my personal practice, I do the gift economy. So people just pay me whatever they feel. I kind of do a suggestion of $1 a minute, and then I'm completely nothing about it. But my personal financial, I've done multiple businesses, entrepreneurship, you know, in multiple spheres, integrative health centers, real estate, So I've kind of mastered to some degree the tools in our society to make that happen. But I've been listening to, for example, the King of Bhutan. My husband and I got married in Bhutan. And many leaders you'll start to hear that in the next 10 to 20 years, the radical changes with this intersection, again, of technology with our society, what is that going to mean for economics? Like moving into resource-based economy? Where is capitalism even going to land? So it may be interesting to, as we loosen our own conditionings, to see if we can get that out of the long view and set up some things for the future. Like what would we like to create? Creative manifestation relative to support for as many people as possible's nervous systems realizing we're not our thoughts. Just maybe even that simple. And what can this group do as a beacon for that and supporting others? And so that's all my thoughts are about that.
Thank you, Catherine. Ken?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to join you. This is very helpful and enlightening. I'm representing more of the organization aspect. I'm working with a small group, all volunteer, nonprofit, and but I come from a background in academic medical health care and the administrative business sides of that. And in the organization I'm working with, there have been some of our board that have been encouraging us to raise money, and it almost seems like the encouragement is just because that's what organizations do, right? They raise money, and I've been arguing to some extent, or just trying to lend a perspective that, and this is kind of what I would think could be brought to this conversation somewhat in response to Connie's comments about wanting to focus on the integrity aspects. And so I think there are aspects of business practice which don't necessarily get included in our conversations in this arena, because business as the word itself sometimes has a lot of prejudice, reflex reactions. It's a word we think badly of, but it is also something then that is part of our persona, and not if you get yourself above that and realize that it's just another aspect of how we are. And as Philip Goldberg was saying, it's a practical matter as well, that it's the world we live in, at least at this point in time. And there are aspects that certainly healthcare is struggling with the same things. I spent much of my career having some of the same ethical questions about how should we be charging and what are we charging for healthcare, and being really repulsed by what some of the salaries were and the bonuses were when others were struggling just to get by. And many of those people now struggle even worse caring for COVID patients. So, but there are some things I think that we can bring to our arena that help to provide some guidance. And so we can draw integrity from things like making sure that we're fully accountable and that we are using the standards that are set forth in the formal organizations that govern what are legitimate ethical accounting practices. There are specific rules that are used, and any accountant has to use those. The acronym is GAAP. And those would include things like making sure that if you're in an organization, there are proper controls and checks and balances, so you know the money is being spent as it should be, but also then that we are able to establish clear, rational, strategic plans with goals that then show the relationship to the need for the financial resources that support those goals, and then being as transparent as possible in communicating what those goals are and how the funds are being raised. And just as a last example, I know we all get inundated, well, not everyone, but if you are at all interested in what's happening politically and you say yes to one email, you're going to get slammed with requests for political fundraising. And I've on numerous attempts tried from either candidate groups or groups like Move On to say, what are you going to do with this money? Because I've already given, and all I get the sense of is they just need the money to pay staff to send me more emails to ask for more money. And there's no transparency or accountability for how those funds are being raised. And I think for those of you who have shared about your private practices or whatnot, you're in a sense doing this by saying, I'm making my living this way and I'm being as fair as I can in what I'm charging you from an organization standpoint. And I think the ethical hackles stand up on the backs of our necks when we hear about the people that have gotten absurdly rich, and they're definitely gouging and just gaining money to then say, I've got more money. But we can turn to the principled parts of business and apply those principles to this arena. There's no evil thing about the word running your organization like a business if that's taken in the most ethical and integrity forward perspective. So thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Pierre, and you also have a good comment here on the chat box. Just by way of introduction, there's a significant difference between a counselor therapist that has had formal training and is regulated by a governing body and is bound by a code of ethics, and a spiritual teacher. So I'm not sure, Pierre, if you want to speak more on that, but I just want to say that was posted earlier by you.
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm here in Nelson, British Columbia, and I've got COVID, so I'm kind of bereft, but appreciate this opportunity and this discussion. And clearly, there's no black and white issues here. We're talking about a continuum. And one of the things that we're all aware of, I'm sure, is the inundation of spiritual teachers and peddling their wares and the commodification of spirituality. On the other extreme is people who, for example, hold satsangs. I've attended some, say like Pamela Wilson, holds a very reasonable satsang, holds it at a venue where there's camping available to reduce costs for people. It's great.
Pierre, you're frozen.
Let's see if he unfreezes.
Teachers, how there's a subtle.
Pierre, we didn't hear what you were saying for the last few seconds. After you said there's Pamela Wilson has retreats at venues that have camping, we didn't hear anything after that because your video froze up.
Okay, I'm on a sad internet, so it freezes a bit. I'll maybe try without my video on. It might make it better. So Pamela Wilson holds satsangs that I've attended, for example. I've attended other satsangs too. And they're very reasonable, the cost. She picks venues where there's camping options and charges a small fee for hosting it, and acknowledges a lot of work to putting that all together. On the other end, as mentioned previously, there was Osho with these 90-something Rolls Royces. Something that I don't notice in the discussion much is the responsibility for the footprint we have on this planet. So if you charge a lot of money for your services, then people have to work a lot to earn the money to participate in those services. And then that's generating a really large footprint. So people are charging, the example previously was $1,000 an hour. We're on a small finite planet with limited resources, and we can't all live that way. So I don't see that often being brought in, and I'd like that to be explored a bit more. What is an ethical footprint associated with this? On one level, we're in a finite planet, as I mentioned earlier, but we are also delving into realms that are limitless. And so, there's no finite limits on truth and love. And that intersection between physical manifestation and source is interesting. As a young man, I spent a lot of time in Findhorn in the 70s, and there I was immersed in creative manifestation. And my whole life, I was always been able to manifest exactly what I need, which has freed me up to do volunteer work and other activities. I often think about all the volunteers on this planet who work selflessly for the betterment of mankind or animals or sentient beings or whatever without charging any money. Then you wonder what's going through people's minds who can generate millions and millions of dollars, and it becomes a personal treasure trove. So these are some of the issues that go through my mind, and I'm appreciating this discussion because I think we have to mature in this realm. And as I mentioned earlier in a comment, spiritual teachers aren't really bound by any ethics or any governing body. And I understand this organization is attempting to address that. And I really applaud that. Because if we're going to enter into the marketplace, we can't just take part of the marketplace and not the rest.
Thank you, Pierre.
Ability, fair practices, etc. So that's just some thoughts I had that I wanted to put out there.
Thank you, Pierre.
Thank you.
Great, great. Alan. I'm sorry, Alan, can you unmute yourself there again?
Yes, thank you. A warm hello to everyone. I'm a newcomer to ASI, and I have to thank David Beaver for introducing me to your group. I'm an oceanographer, as you can tell from my background there, and an aquanaut and physicist, oil spill specialist. I'm retired and live in Washington State. I have really enjoyed your comments so much, and I don't know that I can contribute a whole lot because I haven't made a dime involving spirituality. However, I published a book just recently in this past year. Ironically, as a consultant in my business, I would make more in 2 hours than I've raised in selling my book in the first year of its existence. So money is just not an object as it relates to my podcasts and other interviews and things that have resulted from my book. The book really is a spiritual experience for me. During the pandemic, I finally had time to sit down and write my book. It's a result of over 80 years of experiences that I can't explain, mystical events, very, very spiritual events. And finally, I had time to consolidate them, pull them all together, and describe what it has meant for me. So selling my book is not an objective. I wrote it mostly because my kids, grandkids, and now my great-grandkids, I have a great-grandkid going into college, yikes. And, they've all said, Grandpa, you gotta write these stories down. And so I finally did, and I did it for them. So I'm not trying to make money off of this book that I feel is a spiritual event in my life. But I wanted to share that with you and marvel at all of the incredible things that so many of you are doing in motivational speaking, and I think sharing your knowledge with people who can probably be brought to a whole new level of happiness in their life. And so it's wonderful to join you and hear about your experiences.
Thank you, Alan.
Can you share your book's name and title? I tried to go Google you on Amazon and I can't find you. So
Oh,
I think
really? Oh,
your grandchildren are right.
well, it is there on Amazon.
It is? I looked you up. Okay, what is it? I want to get it.
It's called Clues Can Light the Way.
Clues?
Clues Can Light the Way. Let me change my background here to my office. Oh,
Okay,
you probably can't.
Finally are.
Yeah, you probably can't read it in the background anyway. It's Clues Can Light the Way. And the subtitle is A Discovery of Clues for the Greatest Puzzle of All, the Purpose of Life and Beyond.
Neat. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for asking.
So may I return us to the topic here? I'm really curious, how many people have experienced spiritual financial abuse? How many people feel that they've experienced? Okay, not a lot of hands, but the ones that are waving, oh, there's more when I scroll. I'd like to hear from you all. Would that be okay?
Maybe at this point, if somebody wants to answer her question, just unmute yourself.
I can share. I am from India, and in my 20s, there was a lady who said that she was the reincarnation of Krishna. And one of my best friends got me involved. And she made us say some prayers, and she used to shake her fingers. So we all started shaking our fingers. And she asked we went to like a retreat in Bangalore, India. I was very stupid. I was only in my early 20s. And there were stories like, when she wants the rain to pour off from like on this part of the garden, long story short, I gave her 36,000 rupees for that 4 days. And then a few years later, I'd moved to the UK, and then she contacted me again and she wanted some more money, but I followed my instincts. But she pretty much got money out of people for a little while. That's the only time.
I'd like to share something. Is it okay for me to talk now? I was in an institute at one that I thought I very much enjoyed, but it expanded very quickly. And in one case, I know there was an institute opened up in San Jose, and quite a few people donated large amounts to buy the house that they were in. When the teacher passed away, his wife kind of dissolved a lot of the institutes, and the people were absolutely blown away that this place they had bought could be sold. So the one lesson I would take away from that I think the Institute for Spiritual Integrity could perhaps lay out as a possibility of being part of what we're doing is that when teachers are asking for donations, that they actually say that it's going to go into some kind of a foundation that will have board members, and in the event literally that the teachers suddenly were to pass away or become mentally ill or go nuts, that the money won't evaporate on them, and that the things that they're achieving won't necessarily all go sideways at once. Because it was a real shock to quite a few people when there was like 13 large institutes that there was just a rather quick dissolution of them all, and people just suddenly found themselves without an institute that they had really poured a lot of money into. So that's a comment regarding that I was pretty close to that situation.
That used to happen in the TM movement a lot too. There'd be a big drive to buy a building in a certain area so that, you know, for a center, and then the movement would sell it, you know. And then boom, then let's raise more money and buy another building. Or there were these drives to get, you know, thousands of pundits to come and to Iowa and be chanting, and then they wouldn't come, and then there'd be more money raising for that, and that kind of thing happened and happened and happened. There was even a thing where, you know, Maharishi would, if you paid $1 million, you could become a Raja, he would call it, which is some kind of hotsy-totsy title for, you know, people that could be around him in Holland and so on. So I don't know. At the same time, you know, the TM technique saved my life when I was a druggy teenager. So my predominant feeling is gratitude. But boy, there was just a lot of weird stuff with money.
Yeah, actually, just kind of a further comment. You know, the teacher kind of comes onto the scene and becomes authoritarian without trying to, and maybe just simply a suggestion that says in some of the notes that we create, that to really talk within the network of students you have. A lot of times you've got real estate agents, you have financial advisors, and I've noticed a lot of times that the teacher, and I'm definitely one of these, I don't want to ask for help, but at the same time, you know, obviously when you have 5,000 or 10,000 students, then people ask, you know, they offer their help. But in the beginning, it can be surprising that, you know, you decide as a teacher you don't want to pry too much and ask too many questions. You really want them to ask you the questions. It's kind of been my thing, and then lo and behold, I'll find out that, you know, I've been sitting here trying to figure out something with cameras, and I've got somebody that's an executive at a studio, and I don't know that because I haven't been prying or asking. So anyway, one idea here is to make it known to the people that you're going to create, or the idea of just simply creating foundations that can't be just taken out from under the very people that are putting the money into it. And then also, you know, asking for expertise in some of these things, like design expertise and stuff. I've seen institutes completely designed, campgrounds completely designed that didn't take into account, because they were designed in a teacher's head, they didn't take into account that maybe the females need 3 times as many bathrooms. You know, pretty simple stuff if you engage with experts, and easy to overlook if you're trying to do it as a one-man band or one-man woman.
Thank you, David. I'm going to go to Celia.
Thank you, Jack. Thanks for the topic. Hi, everyone. Celia here. I think there's another person, Hayat, trying to raise their hand. You know, when the question was asked, have any of you experienced financial abuse? My first response was no, and I didn't put up my hand. And then I thought, yeah, you know, I did my yoga teachers training with the Shivananda Vedanta centers, and then I went back and led a workshop there, a retreat. And I was told that, you know, the first time teachers come and lead, it's an offering, so there's no pay. And I said, okay, that's fine. So I did that work, which was a big job, a really big job for nothing. And then a couple of years passed, and then I got an invitation to come back and teach, and there was sort of a contract offer with an amount of money. And I thought that was great. And then a little bit of time passed as we were sort of working out the details. And then the question came back, or the contract, the actual contract came, and it was about, you know, giving a free offering of this workshop. And I emailed back and I said, I thought the deal was first time free, and then after that we get paid, and here's the email that says the amount that you actually offered me. And the person who I was doing the negotiations with rescinded that and said, oh, of course. Well, that was a mistake, but would you be willing to kind of give this to us as a donation? And I said, actually, no, I wouldn't. I'd like to stick to the original offer. And so because it was in writing, they said, okay, yes, of course. So we worked all that out, and I went and I led the workshop. But I just got the feeling that I was suddenly like on the outs because I'd kind of insisted on getting paid. And they didn't invite me back. And who knows, whatever. Maybe it's up to me to, come back and make the effort to go forward. It was just, it's just a very strange experience of like feeling like the minute I don't say, of course I'll do this for free because I'm so spiritual, I might lose something. And then I just want to say two other things that relate to kind of this very sort of tricky, sticky money and spirituality thing. I offer spiritual care in a long-term care facility, and I make $8 an hour more than the caregivers who are like cleaning up the poo and feeding the residents and like doing really hard physical work. And I do spiritual work and I make $8 more an hour. Just kind of interesting. And then the other piece is, and I really like someone who sort of said why they have a sliding scale and what their categories are. I just have a sliding scale for my spiritual direction practice. And it's just like general, like whatever you can afford, But there's one person who I know can afford more than she gives me, and it bothers me. And so, I'm just looking at that, talking about shadow work. It's like, okay, that bothers me. I need to set up a boundary maybe differently than I had. So good learning here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Celia. Jeff?
Hey, how are you doing, Jack? Oh, it's great to see you. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here, so I'm trying to do this the best way that I can. I feel like what you said in the beginning, that it's a matter of conditioning, is really the issue. Like what our beliefs are about money, and so I'm just gonna have to sit with this. I don't know if I'm ready to even do this, but yeah, I have a teacher that's living with me, okay, for a long time. And I was a student a long time ago, probably 20 years ago. It was a very close class. And so there was, a connection between me and the teacher as a friend, as a mentor. But, he's been staying with me for 5 years. He's left for a couple, like a year maybe, and came back. I invited him back, right? So but there's a lease agreement, and I just, there's no money coming in. And there's a lease agreement, there's an understanding, but there's no money coming in. So I'm having an issue with it because on the one hand, I want to be considerate of my friend, which I feel like I have been overly considerate, honestly. Like I've been pretty damn considerate. But yeah, and I don't know how this is going to change. I know he's working at things. I know he's worked hard. He works harder than I do. And but the other part of that is that we teach what we do, what we are, So the conditioning comes through because there is that stigma against business, marketing, sales, and it's come through, you know, in our conversations. And he's not the only one. I mean, you know, my dad was my first teacher, right? And none of the two mentors that I have, my dad and this teacher, come from a very different place. You know, they're not focused or chasing money, right? They're chasing something else. And that's why, you know, I was able to hang with them, because I've seen people that chase money and I don't hang with them. I don't hang very long. But so there's, you know, that part of the teaching, but then there's the part which you're not taking care of the foundation, you know, and that's the concerning part. How do you, like, I'm trying to do the same thing. I'm trying to come from a pure place and actually teach something of value. And I've been really like learning how to like figure out how do I provide value in the world? And how do people provide value for me? You know, so I guess I just wanted to get that off my chest, and I'm still trying to figure this out right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. I suppose our own, you know, if something is niggling and it's niggling for a long time, it's like, all right, it needs action, needs resolution there somewhere. And it feels like this is 5 years cooking, you know? So, you know, maybe the greatest learning sometimes is, you know, grabbing that thorny briar and like having that conversation around what feels ethical and fair to you, and see if the two of you guys can meet, you know, to see if the two souls can find where does money come into our agreement, you know, especially if there's a lease. It's like, then if there's a lease agreement and then it's not honored, we've got some mismatch going on there, you know.
Yes, it's a work in progress. It's been a 5-year work in progress, but I'm, you know, even more than that, I'm more interested in learning today with all you guys, you know, that issue of value, you know, what is valuable? Because man, nowadays, I'm looking at the new technology coming out and new opportunities coming together. So what is valuable, even in the space of art and metaverse and all that fun stuff? What is really valuable?
Yeah, good points, Jeff. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Hayat, you were trying to raise your hand earlier. Celia was saying, I'm not sure if you're there. Just pop in if you are.
Thank you, Jack. I posted my thoughts in the comments, but I'll just briefly say it out loud. So I don't have any experience on the providing a service and earning an income side of it quite yet, but I have been thinking lately about the school that we send my 7-year-old son to. I live in San Antonio, Texas, and there's a lot of organizations and schools that are faith-based that like to base their model on nonprofit model. We chose this school because it has a gentle approach and like a natural environment and checks a lot of boxes, but it is faith-based, which was okay. But lately, especially last Christmas, we were asked, there's constantly pressure for parents to donate for all kinds of different causes and things, and for teachers and help to teachers and things. So for Christmas, we were asked to donate materials to build gingerbread houses. Our efforts were gathered to actually mix the supplies, make the gingerbread houses, organize the events, plan the events, and then we paid tickets to attend the event, and then we purchased the gingerbread houses. So I was, at the end of that event, I was thinking, okay, so I am actually paying tuition. I'm not sending my kids for free, but it does feel like a full-time job just being a parent at this school. And I was thinking, like, the principal of this school is a very strong, influential female in her community, yet she always feels like a beggar to me. Like she's constantly has that beggar attitude. And I was thinking, like, the thought that I was thinking the other day was, I wish she would switch the model to for-profit, where she would have her teachers be much long-term, have a stronger presence in the community, raise your prices, and just make it for profit, and stop using our free time. We're sending our kids to school to have some free time. You're using our free time and our resources on top of us paying tuition. So it just feels a little icky to having nonprofit and constantly draining resources that way. So thank you for giving me a chance to participate.
Thank you, Hayat. And then so many of us spiritual leaders have set up not-for-profits, have come under especially the US tax system of a church or a charity, or with that status. Personally speaking, I couldn't do it. I worked for donation in the beginning, the first 5 or 7 years, very influenced by the Indian model. One day I was giving a weekend retreat in DC, and this woman who came on full scholarship, at lunchtime, I've got a taxi going down to a restaurant down the street if anybody would like to ride with me. She was on full scholarship, and I was there with my sandwich that I'd made that morning. I was like, okay, Jack, okay, there's something really off here. And so slowly but surely I started charging and actually having a fixed rate.
Yeah.
Exceptions, of course, and then as the years went by and I moved to the US, I couldn't set up a not-for-profit. I couldn't. I thought, no, I do want to make profit so that I can retire at some point. I do want to make profit. So I set up a for-profit. That was my journey, right through from donation to like, nope, it's for profit. That's what sits in integrity with me, Works on me. Phil.
I just want to note how complex this issue is, and you could feel it in all the various comments. And in my own research, it seems that even the subject of what constitutes financial abuse is tricky and often in the eye of the beholder. You see gurus courting celebrities and rich people, and that's found to be offensive to many of us. But they say they just need to pay the bills. And so they lean on people with means to contribute because they can contribute more than the average student or devotee. And a lot of it has to do with what the money is used for. So in my experience, if it's used for self-aggrandizement and the teacher is living big and the teacher's family is getting wealthy, then it seems abusive. If the same money raised by the same methods is used to further the propagation of teachings or the health of an organization that people find of use and value and good for the world, then it's not considered abuse. It's just considered an unfortunate thing that a spiritual leader has to do. And the other piece of it is, to pick up on Connie's comments, these shadow features around money can lead people to levels of greed and materialism and chicanery that we call abuse. But in my experience, most spiritual teachers, just like most artists and writers, err in the other direction. We want to be so idealistic and hold to such high values that we don't take seriously the need to think about money. I mean, I think about it in my own life. You know, I have double dose. I'm a spiritual teacher, but most of my life I've earned my money as a writer. And often I used to say, I'm really bad at money. And then I realized this, I'm not just bad at money. I have contempt for even having to think about it. I disdain, you know, business people and people who are, you know, trying to make money. And so I was, in my own ego was tied up in not being that way. And that was to my own detriment. And so finding our way through these thickets is, you know, whether we're teachers or whether we're beholden to teachers who have to think about money, these are complex issues. And they're very individualized and have to, you know, be contextualized, you know, on a case-by-case basis. So.
I just want to make a brief comment here. Me and my dog, here he is. There's just one idea to throw in the mix here. We can discuss it maybe in subsequent weeks, but in certain spiritual circles, both large and small, there's an ends justifies the means kind of mentality. And as a case in point, I just received an email the other day, and I put a link to the article in the chat about Mother Teresa. She, you know, her sisters did not need to touch their bank accounts. Mother always said, we don't spend for that with regard to purchasing property. And if she needed a house, she went straight to the owner, whether it was a state or a private person, and worked on him for so long that she eventually got it free. She saw it as her God-given right never to have to pay anyone for anything. Once she bought food for her nuns in London for £500, when she was told she'd have to pay at the till, she flew into a rage and was shouting, "This is for the work of God." And this went on so loud and so long that eventually a businessman waiting in the queue paid up on her behalf. Now, Mother Teresa was wonderful and did wonderful things, but there's definitely this mentality in spiritual teachers, sometimes both famous and unknown, that what I'm doing is God's work, and it's so important that I don't really have to abide by the normal rules of finance and other things as well. Anyway, I just wanted to throw that in.
Thanks, Rick. Tom Whelan, your hand was up a while ago. If you're still there. Maybe he's gone off. I'm just going to jump to Nick, just so that we hear new voices. Just prioritize that.
Hello, lovely to hear. I've been putting my youngest son to bed, so I've been listening as I wander around parenting, which I have to say has a certain piquancy to this conversation and has done for a long time. The challenges of providing for a family add another tension into the financial piece. Actually was another form of integrity challenges around money. So I first started offering free non-dual experiences 16, 17 years ago. And like many have said, donation-based. And in London, certainly at the time, and I'm pretty sure still now, donation-based means no one puts any money in, because we don't have a culture in the UK of a donation-based culture. Which is, when you go to LA, people say donation recommended $25. What they mean is it costs $25. We're going to pretend it's a donation, but that's another conversation. I had a long journey, as I'm sure many have, about can you charge for love? Can you charge for wholeness? Can you charge for what is the gift that we all get given? Went through many different versions of that, including the stark realization that even when you give it away for free, often no one wants it anyway. Which is another interesting part of this conversation. But the bit I wanted to bring in now is another form of integrity challenge that I've faced, which is, sorry, I'll put on my video. I realize I'm speaking totally anonymously, so I operate now the model of a Robin Hood kind of principle. So I charge leaders for leadership work, principled around non-dual connected, surrendered leadership, but often hiding that away a little bit. So that creates a little lack of integrity in the one side. And then I and my wife, we offer lots of spiritual work, workshops, trauma-based work, that kind of stuff, almost for very little or next to nothing, which is where I put a lot of my energy and my thoughts and development time. So therefore, the people I'm charging, I'm not giving them the full benefit of my attention and love, but they're paying for our life to carry on existing. And the people who don't really pay much, if anything, even though often they can, I'm putting a lot of energy and time into. But if I added up all the money I've made from all my books, all my meditations, talks all over the world that I'll quote in the wisdom/spiritual context, it probably amounts to, a few months income over 16, 17 years. And of course, I can take full ownership for pricing challenges and all that kind of stuff. But I think it's an interesting challenge to bring into this conversation around a kind of Robin Hood mentality where you're sort of taking from the rich to provide to those who aren't. And then does that actually cause you, myself, more challenges, less challenges? And does that have integrity? And in the sense of alignment and wholeness. So I just wanted to add that as another sort of challenge around taking from where the money is and giving where the money isn't, doesn't necessarily lead to alignment around one's attention, focus, and commitment. I don't have an answer, obviously, just another lens.
Thank you, Nick. That's very rich. I'm conscious that we're just going from person to person, and there's so many interesting threads that each one, deserves to be pulled apart, because I think we're all learning from each other. It's so rich. Ken and Alan. Ken?
Yeah, thank you. Just a couple of other quick observations. One, I put this in the chat too, but I've heard some people, and I think, Jack, you may have done this actually, of using the term non or not for profit. And I think there's a general assumption that means that business or organization would not make money, would just break even. But the definition of a nonprofit is that there are no shareholders. That's the tax legal definition. But this misconception of that term, oh, you're a not-for-profit, that means you're not out to make money. You have some ethical goodness and integrity about you. And then if they do make money, it's looked at sideways, like maybe they've been deceiving. So it's a misunderstanding generally of how that term was created in business and tax code and all that kind of stuff. So it's helpful to understand the definition of the playing field and the terms that are used. But I wanted to also raise another curveball question, which I haven't heard yet. And it's about the strange kind of psychology of not charging enough. And we do as people have this weird thing where if you present something, and I would imagine that many people on this call would feel like I just want to help as many people as possible. And so I want to either give it away or charge as low a price as possible. But there is a strange psychology where if you're not charging enough, it's questioned as to whether it's really worth anything or if it has value. And if it costs more, it must be better. And so that's another kind of strange dilemma that has to be factored into whether you're actually showing the true value of what you're providing by charging a sufficient price. So anyway, just thought I'd add that to the mix. Thanks.
Alan?
Yes, Ken, what a beautiful segue. Oops, Am I? No, I'm not muted. What a beautiful segue into what I was preparing to say. You know, as I mentioned earlier, I had a business that I ran, and I had managed 3 companies until I decided to be self-employed, and I hired a corporate attorney to help me in making that decision, because I was mainly concerned with what should I charge as an individual. And his first question to me was, do you believe that you have something significant of value for others that you want to sell? And my answer was very quickly, yes, I really believe I do. He said, then you need to charge the highest price that you feel is fair, worthy of what you can offer. And in the group of people of your age, background, experience, charge the highest value that you feel you can charge. People believe, he told me, that you get what you pay for. And that ties in with what others have been saying, I believe here. And whether it's spiritual teaching or, in my case, oceanographic and oil spill related work, people swarmed to me. Within my first week, I was overloaded with work. And it was that way until I retired. You get what you pay for.
Yeah, but you know, you're charging presumably the oil companies, and I'd say sock it to them, charge them all you can. But
no, that's not true.
Okay.
It wasn't just oil companies. I was often working for private small companies and government agencies. Anyone that had an oil spill, many times they were near broke.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But in the spiritual field, I think there's something to what you're saying, yes, but also there are people who, you know, just are sincere spiritual seekers who really don't have a lot of money. So there's some provision has to be made for them.
I agree. Yeah, no, I understand.
I want to go to David Beaver, just to spread around the voice.
Okay, as Phil said, I think this is a very complex issue. I think we're all realizing that. And there are resonances in all kinds of other aspects of society, both the business world and the various areas that give so much and get so little, from childcare to healthcare to various nonprofit organizations. And we, although there is that feeling that they're always trying to get money from us, so are major universities. Harvard is always out there harassing their graduates for more money. So any organization that does something needs to get money, and either they're selling something, and then there's where we have our problem. I've taught for more than 40 years, and for more than half that time, I didn't charge a dime. And then it was only someone who was working with me who encouraged me to begin at least getting donations, and then perhaps even charging at a later time. It's an issue that I've been working through personally. And my teachers back in the day, before I started teaching, were people who always thought of service as an adjunct to teaching, both for the student and for the teacher, that teaching should be something, service should be something that's involved with. So for the vast majority of the time I've been teaching, I've been doing various service projects. And while they were oftentimes nonprofit or very low key, and so I just barely made a living there, it did allow me to do my teaching for little or nothing. That's changing. I'm going to take a curve here because this is not something that's been brought up, and I don't want to really get into the issue, but I'm surprised at how this relates to something I've been talking about in ASI and on the board for quite some time, and that is, what do we as spiritual teachers do about the world? The world is in a series of major crises and challenges right now. And the tendency, and again, we've been discussing this with many teachers, has been to cocoon within our own Sangha, spiritual communities, teaching groups, and those problems are out there in the world. Well, what I'm hearing more and more here is that in dealing with money, we have to involve ourselves with the world and the structures of the world. Well, the problems are the same thing. So here's the peculiar thing I just picked up in this conversation. By not accumulating money, we put ourselves in the position of saying there's not much we can do about the world because we don't have any money and leverage in the world. It allows you, by being poor, or at least just to get by, not to be responsible for acting in a world that does take some kind of money, leverage, position, all of that, to do anything about it. I hadn't seen that until just tonight.
Yeah, thank you, David. Good points. We've got 3 minutes left. I am going to go to Pierre and Connie, but what I'd like everybody to do is, I am noticing that we're opening a can of worms and we're just seeing how diverse this topic is. What I'd like everybody to do is just take a minute, and what part of this conversation would you like to see the next webinar drill into? And just put that phrase, that line into the chat box, and we'll use that then to be the platform for the next time we meet. If you could do that, we'd really appreciate it. So Pierre, short and sweet.
Thank you. Briefly, my partner is a counselor, an author, and a registered therapist, and I am an educator. And I've always been spared of having to worry about money because I was on a salary. And a lot of my work involved a lot of volunteer work and went over and beyond. So what I'm interested in, and what I would like to see us explore more, is our conditioning around money and lack, and the ramifications of money. Like, our current economic order is a relatively recent phenomena, yet it's often taken as an absolute reality. In the past, there was a marketplace where there was fair exchange. Now we have generated this concept of profit, and on the darker side of profit, it is two people have an exchange and one person walks away with excess versus a fair exchange. Adding to that, just the whole notion of exploitation. If someone writes a book or sings a song or has an offering that's very popular and gets sold and generates a lot of money, that doesn't necessarily entail exploitation. So I think we all need to examine, and I'd encourage further discussion on this. What are the limitations of our economic order? How are we conditioned by it? And how does it limit our view in these matters and how we proceed? Anyway, I'll end it at that. Thank you. Great discussion, everyone, and I'm honored to be a part of it.
Thank you, Pierre. Connie, you had your hand up. Do you wanna?
Oh, that's okay. I put it in the chat. I think those of us who are identified with spirituality, spiritual people, you know, most of our adult lives, put money into the shadow. We reject the value of money, the beauty of money, the meaning of money. And it becomes like a Rorschach test. It carries all these projections. And for other people, it carries all the positive projections. They're identified with success. And so the money brings them value. And that split, I would like to explore more.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Yeah, I'm conscious of it. Wherever we go with this, there's got to be a takeaway that helps us as individuals to be more in integrity, to be more honest with ourselves, and to be more transparent in everything we do. Everything. We're at the time, folks. Please take a minute to write in where you want this to go for next time. And thank you for taking 90 minutes out of your busy lives and for sharing this rich, rich conversation. Maybe we can continue our community and to speak with each other. Anybody else from the ASI board want to say something? No? Okay. Bless you all. Catch you downriver. Thank you for your time.